gentlemen, boys and girls, non-binary, distinguished guests, welcome to Ridiculous, the Life of a Clown. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm speaking with Jeff Raz, member of the Pickle Family Circus, founding member of the New Pickle Circus, founder of the San Francisco Clown Conservatory at San Francisco Circus Center, founder of the Medical Clown Project, and now a noted author. Ladies and gentlemen, my conversation with Jeff Raz.
My name's Jeff Raz. I have been a performer, playwright, director, producer in circus and theater for many, many years. And right now, I have just published my first book, so I get to add author to that.
That's great. And correct me if I'm wrong, member of the Pickle Family Circus.
Yep.
Founding member of the New Pickle Circus.
Yes.
Founder of the original Clown Conservatory in
Correct.
San Francisco. Star of Corteo.
Yes, I'll go with star.
Okay. Am I missing any other major highlights there?
Those work well for me.
Okay.
No, the one I want to add is the Medical Clown Project.
Medical Clown Project, of course.
Done.
That's such a huge part of what you've been doing for the last few years.
Yeah.
And you created the Medical Clown Project. You didn't invent medical clowning, obviously, but you created the Medical Clown Project, which was the first major medical clowning organization here in San Francisco.
In a way, yes. The Clown Care Unit, which is out of New York, did have a group here for a number of years.
Oh, really?
And it had more to do with fundraising than anything else that they closed it down. But Sherry Sherman, my wife, and I started the Medical Clown Project with slightly different approach than Clown Care Unit. We took a lot from the Clown Care Unit. I mean, everything from sort of procedures and basic logistics to concepts of empowering patients, of going in pairs, lots of that. Where we deviated a little from theirs was we looked from the very beginning at the full range of life. We said, okay, infants, children, got it. Adults, yes. And that really mirrors how clowning has evolved. Clowning, for most of its existence in most places, was for adults, including in the United States. It's only quite recently that it's been, clowns are for kids.
Like since probably the 50s or 60s, I would say.
Yeah. There's a wonderful article by David Carleon, who is my partner in planning the clown section of the Smithsonian Folklife Festival. The Smithsonian Folklife Festival this summer is going to be doing a Circus Arts Center. And he and I have been the consultants on the clown section.
I did not know that.
And he wrote this wonderful brief history of clowning in the United States on the Smithsonian website. And he traces exactly this. This is one of the he's an historian. That's one of the things he's really interested in is, wait a second, how did it get to be that clowns were happy and for kids? That's a really recent thing, even though to many people it feels normal. And then he says, okay, this whole creepy clown thing is the reaction to that. Okay, it's too saccharine. Let me do something back. And neither of them make sense with what historically clowns have done.
They don't represent what we were from the origins on through now.
Absolutely.
And you and I discussed many times how clowns in indigenous cultures that aren't necessarily part of the Western clown tradition tend to exist specifically to make people aware of and reinforce taboo. They exist outside of taboo to show people what they can and can't do within that specific society in many indigenous cultures.
Yeah, we're starting to get beyond my knowledge base, but I've certainly seen that. And yeah, you and I have had some really nice discussions on that. Certainly, one of the things I've seen in clowning around the world, and I'm not a historian, I'm not like David in that way, but it seems like a theme that keeps coming back is clowns make connections in the local language, often in a local dialect. Sometimes it's really bawdy. Whatever they're doing is about connecting with the human beings right here in front of me. Mm-hmm. And that's sometimes in a healing framework. My colleague who runs the medical clown, a lot of the medical clown world in Brazil, says he talks about the most recent medical clown wave started with the Clown Care Unit in the 80s. But he said, we're coming home. When we go to a hospital, clowns are coming home back to healing, which was a core part of who clowns were. I maintain it still is, by the way, and not just in hospitals, especially now in a world that's so fractious. Clowns always make human connections. Or you're not doing your job if you're not making human connections. And sometimes the art that you're bringing is not the juggling or the mime. Those are vehicles to make another human connection.
And you and I are both fans of Dr. Fry. Is it Stephen Fry at Stanford? Who's done all the work on the specific medical benefits of mirthful laughter and how it lowers cortisol and activates your entire endocrine system to relax all of your blood vessels. It does amazing things to your body. He's been studying this for over a decade, and it just backs up. It backs up with hard science what you're talking about in clowns aiding in the healing process.
Now, there is lots of that research, and early on when we were making the medical clown project, Patch Adams, who was a very different style of medical clowning, he had a wonderful quote, because he's a doc also, and he said, even though there's no research that shows that being serious helps health, and there's lots of research that you just quoted, and much more, that laughter promotes health in physiological, psychological ways, hospitals are still really serious places. That scientifically doesn't make sense. I love that, and then it got complicated early on with the Medical Clown Project when we went into a kid's room, a young teen, and she was hooked up to something. At the point I didn't know what it was. Turns out she and many of the other folks, children we saw, had cystic fibrosis, and they were trying to break up the stuff in their lungs. And she said, "You can come in, but you can't make me laugh, because if I laugh, I'm going to really hurt myself." And I came in and with that whole framework of laughter is healing, and she just said, "No, laughter's going to hurt me really badly, but you can come in." And so I had to find how do I play without laughter. It was actually quite painful. I did it, and she helped me, but I really realized then, okay, laughter isn't the only medicine. It may be the best medicine and may have all that research, but it was human connection she wanted, and we had a pretty serious conversation. I just tried to stay away from laughter.
Well, I mean, this is something that, again, we have had many discussions about in the past, that in my interpretation of what we do, there's, and I wish I could cite the research on this, but there were some social anthropologists who did research on how humor functions on an anthropological level, and how by making yourself the target of humor, by making yourself the victim of the gaffe, you are bringing your entire audience together as a pack, as a tribe who can look down, in one interpretation, look down upon this fool who has made this mistake that you're not allowed to make, and feel stronger because they didn't make the mistake. They feel stronger. They have the support of this community of people who are laughing together at the person who's going to be driven out of society for creating this taboo. And so taking that, I don't want to say martyrdom, but taking that role upon yourself, you make your audience into a pack, into a tribe, into a social construct that supports itself on a really base psychological level that doesn't require any conscious thought. Right. We are together in our disdain for this mistake this person has made.
The modern adjustment I've felt in that is that in a modern professional clown, you're usually part of the pack. And it's lovely. It's a nice variation. I don't know if that's always been true, but we don't get driven out. The huge difference that you just pointed out between a sarcastic humor, which is what most of the humor that we see is a sarcastic. It's a snarky humor. The difference is that a clown is committed to being right in there with it, and I'm not above it. I'm not separated. I'm not without passion. As a matter of fact, I'm in it right here.
And by being connected with us, they're saying, I'm just like you. We can both make this mistake and move forward beyond it.
Yeah.
So they get to play both sides of that line. They get to play both the ostracized and still be part of the cohesive whole.
Yeah. And which as a performer is actually kind of nice. Though I would guess that in certain times in certain areas, to be a clown was not so comfortable. I mean, I feel lucky to be in an era when, as a professional clown, you really get treated pretty well.
And at the same time, our society, has a great deal of affected disdain. Sorry to use that word again.
Yes,
for our profession.
But I love that it's affected. I mean, again, David Carleon addresses that in this article. My favorite. I'll tell the story that I particularly like on that, because in my experience, I've been working as a professional performer for almost 45 years and a professional clown for most of that time. and I work as an actor and other things, but clowning is a central interest. This whole made-up idea of a clown phobia, which is, the whole thing is constructed, not to say that people aren't sometimes scared, but it's in terms of being a phobia. I don't experience that. And as a professional clown, if someone is scared, which absolutely happens, you know what to do with it. People are scared of dogs. People are scared of lots of things. And my favorite 2 stories, I'll give 2 quick ones. One, when we were first doing the Medical Clown Project, we went to an adult unit that had the elevators open right onto the nurses' station. And that's common. It was an acute and long-term care. And I'm in full costume. I happen to be working by myself that day. The doors open. A nurse looks up and goes, "I am scared of clowns." And I came out and said, "Me too. I'm really scared." She goes, "No, I'm serious." I said, "I am too. Tell me about it." She goes, "Well, they're just, clowns are just," and I'm in full makeup here. And for 6 months, every week, open the door, we had another discussion about how we're scared of clowns. It became our thing. If we didn't have that check-in, and we had a lovely connection, we didn't laugh about it, she was dead serious. It became the game. Another one was in the unit, in the pediatric unit. There was a little girl, maybe 3, sitting on her mom's lap. We went by, the kid screams. I mean, this kid just, ah! And I'm big. And I had a top hat on, so I'm even bigger. I had big shoes. So I walked away. Unfortunately, Mom was going, "Come in, come in, come in." So you're feeling bad about dissing the mom, but I'm not the kid screaming. But we were on that unit for an hour that day, and every time I went by, I wouldn't look in. Big guy looking in, but I'd do a hat trick on the way by, and I'd remember which hat trick, so I was building on the hat trick, and she would scream less. I'm taking this as victory. Screaming a little less, big victory. We're done with our hour. She's still, every time I went by, still screaming a little bit. We go down to the intensive care unit, and I forgot my hat. So I go back up, leave my partner down in intensive care. I go back up to the 5th floor, which is the unit we were on, and I come off, and there's a nurse, the head nurse is standing there with her arms crossed. She said, "Where have you been?" I said, "Well, we have to go to the pediatric ICU." "I don't care. There's a little girl here who needs you." And she hands me my hat. "You forgot this." And the little girl had just, she'd seen me enough, and she comes running up. She hugs my legs, and then I'm there for 10 minutes doing hat tricks because I had to do everything because she's not going to leave me alone. That, to me, that's what being scared of clowns is about. I'm too big. I was in her room. She was feeling sick. But as a pro, I gave her time to say, I need this. I'm feeling sick. Maybe this is a friend of mine.
So jumping back in time.
Jumping back.
Way back. What drew you to clown in the first place?
I was not at all drawn to clowning. When I was 14, I learned how to juggle, and I learned quickly. My father was a physicist. My mother was a sociologist. My brother became a biostatistician, and then I'm the youngest, and where to go. So I learned to juggle at a Renaissance fair. I could do it. I learned in an hour, and I could do it, and people would watch me. Girls would watch me, which I found, wow, that really works. And I started performing as a juggler to be cool. And I'll make no bones about it. It was to be cool. And I realized if I practiced a bunch, I was even cooler. Like I could be cool with the jugglers then. Ooh. And you got to put in about 6 hours a day practice if you want to be a solo professional juggler, which is a pain in the ass. I mean, but I would go out to the park, and I had a couple of friends who would come with me, and I'd put a slack rope up in Provo Park in Berkeley, and I would juggle for a while, do some acrobatics, but it was all to be cool. And at one moment when I was 17 or 18, there was classes. Joe Bellin had a cultural arts center over on Bush Street in San Francisco. And Bill Irwin was teaching a clown class, and then Larry Pizzoni was teaching a circus arts class. Well, Larry, who ran the Pickle Family Circus, who started the Pickle Family Circus, was a tough guy. He was showing the real stuff. And so I took Larry's class, not Bill Irwin's clown class. But I noticed I'd show up a little earlier. Bill's was first, and I'd show up a little earlier, and I watch, and I would really feel embarrassed for the people doing those clown exercises. But it was interesting. There was something there. And Bill's such a brilliant clown and so graceful and was really a hero of mine. But somewhere in there I got hired to be a juggler, but they also needed an MC. And so could I talk to people? And I just slowly got going. And I was working with the group Everybody's Family Circus, which was a funky, community-based, woo-woo circus that really did grate on me to some degree. Like, I don't do woo-woo. I'm a Berkeley boy, but I'm a tough Berkeley boy. Come on. But it infested me a little bit. I was young, and the people were lovely. They're still some of my best friends in the world. And we were teaching at Compañeros de Barrio, which is a preschool for mainly Spanish-speaking kids. And Janet Goulston, who already was a professional teacher and performer, was teaching with me. And I didn't know jack about teaching. So she was teaching me to teach in real time. Seriously, like looking at me, pointing at me, almost like a catcher with a new pitcher. And I was doing it in Spanish. She spoke Spanish. I had Mission District Spanish. And just with these little kids, I remember we did a bit about a nose, a clown nose, and I'd take it off and make it disappear. ¿Dónde está nariz? ¿Dónde está? And just the love you get back. I said, oh, wait a second. This is kind of cool. Having these little kids hugging on your legs. I mean, maybe it's kids hugging on your legs that I love, but these kids, and they would be so excited to see me, and you'd learn little songs with them, and I started to melt a little. The cool dude melted, and I started working in the first circus I worked in was Mark Sackett, who's been a partner of mine for years and years and years with Vaudeville Nouveau through the 80s. He had a job with J.P. Booker Early American Circus, and he was a wire walker and a musician, but he wanted a real clown. And somehow he decided I was a real clown. I was not at all sure I was a real clown, but I'd taken that makeup class, and I had some chops. I had some acrobatic and juggling chops, and I liked Mark. So I got into that, and now I was a real clown, and it was tough. It was really tough. So I learned a lot.
So how did you end up in the Pickles?
In the 80s, I was with Mark Sackett, who I was just talking about, and Dan Menken in a trio called Vaudeville Nouveau. We had for a while a quartet. Gina Leishman, who's now quite a famous composer, and she was then a brilliant musician, joined us for a short time, but her solo career was flying. But in most of the 80s, we had Vaudeville Nouveau. We toured nationally and internationally. We were on Broadway and Comedy of Errors. It was a good gig. And then towards the end of the year, I was getting done. The end of the decade, sorry, I was getting done with that. I went to Europe for 5 months and worked with the Del Arte Players again. I had worked with them in the early 80s. And then I was looking for what to do. And I wrote a solo play, which is my first solo play. And the first version was terrible. There's one person who saw it. There's more than one who saw it, maybe 30. One of them liked it and has mentioned it a few times. I say, if one person wants you to remount it, don't. Just stay away from that. But we rewrote it, and it started to have some success. And while we were doing the rewrite, Joan Menken had left the Pickles, and she and Diane Wozniak were this incredible two-women clown team, which was pretty rare. And they were the leading force in the Pickles coming around the late 80s into the early 90s. Joan went on to do other stuff. They had one year where they had me audition, but they didn't hire me, 90, I guess. They hired some other guy. It didn't work out. The director didn't work out. Well, Larry Pizzoni was coming back, but Louis, who was the acrobatic director, wanted a big guy. So he wanted me. And the whole
He wanted you specifically for basing, or
yeah,
just out of
Louis,
contrast?
No, Louis wanted me for basing.
Okay.
I need big guy to stand underneath. I got all these great flyers. I don't have a base. I love it. The thing I've tried to work on my whole life is keep my weight down. Mm-hmm. At that moment, my weight was exactly what he wanted. But also, Diane Wozniak's tiny, and so you couldn't miss that the two of us just standing next to each other were funny. And I also played drums and percussion, and the theme was percussion.
So this was in the period after Irwin and after Gilkey, but before the New Pickles circus.
Yes, you got it exactly right.
And then the New Pickles, if I'm recalling correctly,
yes,
happened while you were on tour.
Man, you got it all. You have your history. Would that everyone had their history. That's exactly right. You're referring to in the earliest, not the earliest, but in the 70s when the Pickles were an outdoor show, and they had an amazing setup, which they had they had a ring and a ring curb, and they had bleachers, and it would look like a small professional circus. But they had side walls, canvas walls, but they didn't have a top of the tent. And they had a brilliant model, which is they would work with nonprofit organizations all up and down the West Coast who could bring in hundreds of volunteers to sell tickets to the circus. The Pickles would keep the money from the tickets for the show, and the nonprofit would get the midway, selling the food and the games. And there were towns like in Arcata and Bend, Oregon, that the Pickles coming was like the annual town event. It was like Halloween in the Castro. The town would come out. I was not with them at that time, but they had the brilliant clown trio of the Bay Area, which was Larry Pizzoni, who was playing the one of that. Then Jeff Hoyle was playing Mr. Sniff, the number 2, and then Bill Irwin playing Willie the Clown, the number 3.
I mean, that would be, the ideal time to have gotten to see the Pickles. I've always been sad that, I grew up in a part of the country where we didn't have the Pickles.
Yeah. And I was lucky to grow up in a part that had the Pickles, and before that, and during that, of course, the San Francisco Mime Troupe, which those were seminal influences, as well as Make a Circus, which does not get mentioned as much, mainly because, this is my opinion, it was a free show, and it was done specifically in neighborhoods that are underserved. But the Make a Circus did a lot of pioneering work there, and people like Jeff Hoyle, for example, was in Make a Circus when it was in England, and came over to the United States with Make a Circus. So he worked in both of those, and so did I did a lot of work with Make a Circus, and then with the Pickles, people like Wendy Parkman was a mainstay in both of the shows at different times. So was my early juggling partner Billy Kessler.
So you were on the road when the Pickles became the new Pickles.
Yes.
We don't have to go into that, but you can if you like. You went from the Pickles, from the new Pickles, to the Clown Conservatory.
Yeah.
What was that transition like? How did that come about?
It came about because Micah James Sherman Raz was born in 1997.
It's a lot of names.
That's his full name. And Micah's coming back from his second year of college tomorrow. He's in Vermont. He's going to a college in a tiny town in Vermont that's 6 miles from Brattleboro, which is where the New England Center for Circus Arts, run by all of my colleagues from the Pickles. And Aidan O'Shea, who was a teenager when I first met him, lived in Brattleboro. He's now in circus school in Philadelphia, but he was there when my son was first there, terribly homesick, and he took care of my kid as a teenager, right about the same age as when I met Aidan. Which really, that's where you asked me a question about the past, but at this moment I'm really feeling, just sitting here with you, feeling the joy of history living now. Like, history isn't what happened then always. It's how we have a relationship now. And when things that happened 20 years ago come back in a good way. So the transition to the Clown Conservatory was partly because in my mind I knew when my son was born I couldn't be on the road the 200 days of the year that I had been. And it was a deal I made with my wife when we got married. We got married in '96, and I was tired of being on the road. I've been on the road a lot for 20 years, and it gets wearing. It's like so I was gonna quit the Pickles in those few years. And coincidentally, or it was kismet or whatever, the Circus Center, which was what had come out of the Pickle Family Circus School and would later take the Pickles into it, there was Pat Osmond, who was running Circus Center, said, I'm going to write a grant to the National Endowment for the Arts for a clown school. Well, part of my head said, oh, there's something. And the other part said, no one needs a clown school. And the National Endowment for the Arts doesn't fund schools, and I don't think they're going to fund clowns. But luckily, in my experience, you say yes, and then you see what happens. So Pat said, no, I'm really serious. I want this. Would you just write the artistic statement? So I wrote a good one, because I was passionate about this. And as I was writing it, I realized, wow, I got a little itch here. I've taught a lot of 1-week, 2-week workshops classes, and that's really fun because you can like be the hero. You come in, whoo, and everyone leaves jazzed, but they leave and you leave. You have no idea if you've had any impact or not. And I said, well, what if I took the responsibility of training folks for real? Like they're my responsibility. And you may remember the very first day of school, I would always say to the students, I want you to have a 50-year career. I want to be there the whole time. I want comps. And for the last 10 years of your career, could you please make sure it's wheelchair accessible? And people would laugh, but I meant it. And I'd also say, I want you to be better than me. And I realized, oh my God, I had never thought that in my life. I had always taught thinking, yeah, good, they'll be really good students. And I appreciate how good they are. I'm going to kick their ass if we're ever in an audition together. And then I said, no, if you're going to have students for real, you want them to be worse than you? That's stupid. You want them to be better. So as I was writing this, a whole shift happened inside, and we got the grant. But then I got a little scared, and I said, wait a second. I still don't think anybody wants a clown school. We're going to do, in 1999, we're going to do some weekend workshops. Fair enough. Pat said, fine, we'll spend the money. And we got people, literally a guy flew in from South Africa to take the clown workshop. I said, what are you thinking? And what the students from those were saying is, we've been waiting, we've been looking for this, and da-da-da. So then I said, okay, we're going to start a clown school, the Clown Conservatory. I first was going to call it the Clown Factory, but I felt like the students might not be happy with being being made in a factory. And we're going to do 6 months with 10 students, and we'll just try that. And at the end of that, Patty Gallagher, who had already had her PhD in theater and who's now a tenured professor at UC Santa Cruz, but she was my student then, at the end in her exit interview, she just mentioned, have you considered, Jeff, having a curriculum? And I said, no, I haven't actually. What are we talking about? And she said, well, I love what we did. And Patty's the nicest person alive. I love what we did, but you could systematize it. Really? How would I do that, Patty? That was, God bless her, the moment where I went, oh, the big difference is, do you have a methodology that people can use?
So what was, I don't know if I say methodology, but I use the term dogma when I talk about the Clown Conservatory, and not in a negative way, but there was a specific dogma to what clown was there. Mm-hmm. And it's a different dogma than, say, I think someone like Abner the Eccentric uses to interpret clown, or Gilkey. And there's a lot of people like Gilkey whose interpretation of where clown comes from, I just am head over heels in love with.
Yep.
And there's people like Abner who are brilliant performers, very successful. I do not agree at all with how they interpret where clown comes from and how to bring the clown out. But I did respond really strongly to what I consider to be the dogma of the Clown Conservatory. Can you tell us a little bit about what that core set of ideas was?
Absolutely. And you just got me very interested to hear what you thought they were, because, you put together, as a director, you develop this curriculum and you think everyone's going to get it exactly the way you planned it, and that's never, ever true.
I can tell you very simply, emotional vulnerability. Being as open and vulnerable as possible on stage pretty much at all times. That was the core thing that I received that I didn't have before I went to the Clown Conservatory. I became a performer because of my fear of performing. I mean, I'm an intensely antisocial person. I do not like being around other human beings. And still don't, unless I'm getting paid to be up on a stage. I don't want to be in a crowd.
But a pro.
I love being on stage and doing my thing.
Yeah.
But it was about being open and vulnerable and honest. And those elements of the dogma were what stuck with me the most, and what's changed me the most as a person, just in the way I live my life. Wow. But I would like to know what you were trying to get across and what I might have missed.
Well, I'm thrilled that that's what you got from it, and it sort of reinforces this idea that I've heard a number of times, that whatever your dogma is, whatever your curriculum is, if you're the leader, you're the teacher, you better be embodying and trying to embody exactly what you're trying to teach. And that for me, that was this big challenge, especially that year, the year you were there, that I was with Cirque du Soleil. I had a double challenge that year. I had been doing the Clown Conservatory for a while, But then I was now suddenly performing, and what I held for myself is I have to try to perform using the concepts that I'm teaching. Otherwise, why am I teaching them? Back to what you said, why I love it is those are exactly things that I personally try to stick to. And I've been more successful lately. I'll be 60 really soon, and it's taken me a long time. I got those from my mother, from my father, from Pete Seeger growing up, and have not been always successful in using those in my life. But I love those as core. To show you the difference, though, the core I thought, and I still believe in, of the methodology is there's the most dominant teaching of clowning that I see in North America, at least, is a strain that comes from Jacques Lecoq, which is finding your personal clown, that shows up quite differently in Avner, the eccentric Avner Eisenberg, and John Gilkey and Ronlin Foreman, for example. But they all come from that thread, which says character first, character leads to action. It makes perfect sense. When you see a clown, when you feel a clown, it's their character. You see how they dress, how they move, who they are. That's your first interaction, and then the action comes out of that. I started thinking about how I actually learned, and it was not that way. I started as a juggler, as did John Gilkey, by the way. So it was structure first. My first real clowning gig, let me put it this way, it wasn't my first clowning gig. It was the first time I consistently got laughs as a clown, was with, I spent 1978 with the Bay City Reds. And I stepped into a role, Don Forrest's role, in a very tight comedy club passing act. And I learned comedy within that structure. Took me a while, but I got it. So I said, let me start with action first and see how character can come out of action. Totally different premise, a very tactical premise than what you got. I'm thrilled that you got what you got from it, but I also know that you did learn structures that you
absolutely.
now use. And so my idea is that I think that people are coming character to action, and people who are like me, who are going action or structure to character, are trying to meet in that same place. It's that golden place when a clown seems, whatever they're doing seems absolutely inevitable and often surprising. And we laugh at the inevitability, we laugh at the surprise. There's never a moment that feels false. And then we can just fall in love with that person.
So you use these tenets, these principles yourself when you were translating over into your starring role in Corteo.
Yeah.
And you've just written a book.
Yes.
The name of your book is very similar to the name of our podcast, so I don't want to mess it up. It is
The Secret Life of Clowns.
The Secret Life of Clowns.
And the subtitle is A Backstage Tour of Cirque du Soleil in the Clown Conservatory.
And this is a somewhat fictionalized memoir of your entire career, or just that period?
Just that period. While I was on the road with Cirque du Soleil, I was working about 50 hours a week in the tent and about 20 hours a week on my laptop back in the hotel room running the Clown Conservatory from afar. And I still had lots of extra time, more than when I was home raising two boys. And frankly, boredom is a real issue. So I said, okay, let me take good notes. Because I had written some plays. So I wrote a whole book of my tour of Cirque du Soleil and couldn't edit it because it was so boring I couldn't read through it. And then I said, okay, but I want to capture what we got at the Clown Conservatory. As we did, I was there for 10 years. There's 135 of you folks who graduated. A lot of folks do really interesting things. We were doing something right there. I want to capture that because it's going to disappear. So then I started to write the journal or the workbook of the Clown Conservatory. I couldn't even write it because it was so boring. And then I hit the idea, what about go to fiction and use Stanislavski's technique in his 3 great books about acting, An Actor Prepares, Building a Character, and the third one whose name always eludes me. But he takes a first-person fictional account of a student going through a school. And I always liked reading it more than the handbooks because it's fiction. It just opened it up. So I said, twin first-person accounts. One from a student going through school, and the other from the director of the school trying to perform off there in Cirque du Soleil. And the big fiction was I made it like the director was back every other week or so, when really I was gone for, I'd be gone for 6-7 weeks and then come back for a short time. But I wanted to make sure that was woven together. And then I stuck in what I call spotlights on real people, some on some real students. I was trying to illustrate some different paths that students took. Patty Gallagher becoming a professor and a performer in theater. The Gentiles have 4 kids and they tour in a mobile home in Circus's old style. Z. Smith, who for quite a while was a really successful birthday party clown. So I wanted to highlight those and then put in people like Diane Wozniak and Lou Yi, give a little history here. And so I had some factual sidelines. I also did a thing where I work in business consulting now as well. Putting my kids through school involves not relying on royalties from a book. And I read a lot of business books. I had to learn the field. And they always have executive summaries. And everybody always only reads the executive summaries. And I kind of like that, because that let me read a lot of business books really fast. So I wanted executive summaries. I was no way going to call them that. People who are reading my book, I think, are a little allergic to executive summaries. But I gave the student, whose name is Jake, Jake's journal. And so at the end of every Jake chapter, every one of the students' chapter, I have his notes. And I kept it in his voice. But I tried, if someone was a student of clowning and wanted to go through, or a teacher of clowning, and wanted to go through and get a curriculum, they could just go through Jake's notes and say, oh, I see what the progression was.
So if you don't mind, could you share some of that with us?
I'd be happy. Let me start here. You're hearing the. So, I'm going to read just the second chapter with Jake here, and so this is called Clown School Early Days. Our mime teacher has finally stopped talking, and school is over for the week. I turn right outside the main door, run up the stairs, through the parking lot of the neighboring apartment building to get to the N Judah stop. No train yet. I stare down Carl Street into the heart of the Haight-Ashbury and see only a few bike riders coming my way. It is a beautiful San Francisco autumn evening, but I'm too worn out to enjoy it. My first few weeks at the Clown Conservatory have been exhausting. My body aches all over, and I don't even know if I should be here. All I want out of this year at clown school is enough training to get a job with a circus. This has been my dream since I learned to juggle 10 years ago. My physics degree sounds fancy, but I bought the books and paid my rent by busking, juggling on the streets of Boston. Physics isn't fun anymore. Performing is. But learning to be a professional clown is different than juggling on the streets, and San Francisco is a tough city to live in. I'm paying way too much for a small room in a small apartment way out in the cold, foggy neighborhood called the Sunset, spending way too much time on public transportation, and eating way too much rice and beans. I'm going to skip a little forward here. I don't know if I want to spend my life performing, but I have to try to get at least one tour with a circus, any circus. That seemed pretty easy back when I was home in New Jersey, but now, sitting on this small, fold-down bench on the streetcar stop in front of the Clown Conservatory, it seems a lot harder. At 9 a.m. on our first day, without any welcoming speeches or orientation or getting to know you games, we started our first class, acrobatics. By 9:05, my classmates and I were lying face down on a worn-out blue tumbling mat on the floor of a repurposed, but not renovated, high school theater, stretching our ligaments beyond where ligaments should stretch. At 9:30, I was balancing on my head with our teacher, a former Chinese circus star, holding my feet and encouraging me to be strong. I just wanted to live long enough to eat lunch. The streetcar finally rumbles into sight. I grab my bag and hop up from the bench, but the train is so packed with Friday commuters heading home from the financial district that the driver doesn't even slow down. I scream. A woman on the sidewalk gives me a disgusted look, picks up her little boy, and starts walking to the next stop. I flip down the bench and sit again. I take a deep breath. That's his first day. Now, he goes through his notebook then. This is the sort of introducing the notebook. and looks through all of his classes. But I'll skip to Jake's journal because that was what you asked. So this is Jake's journal number 2, September 24th. The big questions. What do I really need to get a job in a circus? What does it take to be a pro? What classes matter? Why do my classes matter to me? We have our first show in less than a month, and I don't want to suck. This whole internal-external thing is a little too woo-woo for a guy from New Jersey, but I do want audiences to love me, not just admire my juggling. The discipline of acrobatics is good for clowns. The risk you take doing acrobatics, even the kind of baby acro we do, can make you braver on stage. Mimes, after all the jokes, know how to be eloquent with their bodies. Homework, the 5 R's. Rehearsal, class assignments plus acts for the show. Reading, assigned reading every week plus meeting with my book club. Starlight, who I like pretty much, and Barry, who is Ronnie's roommate, are my book club. We're good. Training, 1 or 2 hours a day outside of class working on circus skills, acrobatics, dance, mime, and music. No music yet, but we hear it's coming. Writing, keep a journal. Research. We need to research and write a short paper about a clown culture or practice from another part of the world, or a clown with whom very little has been published. Not exactly a physics paper, thank God. Exercises. Work on headstands. Work on handstands. Try not to kill myself. Learn the steps for the group dance number. Juggle with Ronnie. Try doing nothing sometimes when I feel exhausted instead of drinking another cup of tea. Aha moment. Clown school is not as fun as I thought it would be. It might be as much work as grad school.
Very nice. I gotta say, I mean, that really hits specifically on what it was like being in the clown school. It is less fictionalized than I was expecting. So the research papers are some of my favorite parts of the school.
Oh, why?
I did them on topics that were of particular interest to me. Yeah. I did it on the role of clowns in sexuality, and specifically the function of sexuality in clown, and how that goes back to the origins of Western clown in ancient Rome, how it runs through all these different indigenous cultures. I don't want to bore people with that, but that was something that interested me a great deal, and I think I wrote a little bit on medical clowning as well. So those interested me a lot. I think one of the most appealing things about the Clown Conservatory were all the different viewpoints that we got. All the different teachers who were brought in outside of the core curriculum to show us different aspects of clowning. There was this excellent French buffoon who came in, and that was the best experience I've had with buffoon.
French Canadian.
Yes,
Dolores Lenham.
Yes, she was astonishing, and she really made me understand buffoon. I'm not going to call it buffont. It made me understand buffoon in a very clear and specific way that I enjoyed a great deal, and that I used from that moment on in all of my clowning.
That makes. I didn't realize that you connected with Dolores. By the way, she just saw Calvin Kaiku was just in Montreal. Saw her, and Dolores. He took a picture of Dolores, her throwing me a kiss in a totally buffon way, as she is. But I'm thrilled that because it was hard work getting her here, and you're right, totally different than anything I know. I would have been the one in the class who hadn't a clue. And we also had, of course, Avner and John Gilkey. We brought in folks who brought a totally different point of view.
And Gilkey has had the most influence on me as a director of any other clown that I've experienced. If I could study under him every day, I would.
He's just down there in L.A.
Yeah, I'm trying to get him up here. We've been talking for months about me producing a workshop for him up here. It's
so
just
you
when
can go to it.
Exactly. It's just when it's available on his calendar. But aside from the clown teachers, Mo, I believe that was his name, the lawyer.
Oh, Bo Bogotten.
Bo Bogotten. The lawyer, the costume designers.
Yeah.
The Clown Conservatory was not an arts conservatory. The Clown Conservatory was an arts conservatory and a tech school.
Absolutely.
And that was inherent to its appeal and to what it was. And there was so much that it had to offer there that I think the Clown Conservatories that followed it fail. I'm not saying that they fail as schools, but they don't offer... I personally don't believe they should be called the Clown Conservatory because they are so inherently different in structure and tone than the school that I went to. But that's a personal opinion.
I'm not. Sarah Moore is now running the Clown Conservatory. I saw their final show. I felt really good about it in the ways that it was. What I loved is it looked unlike anything I would have ever tried, and they were still on these core principles of a lot of rigor, a lot of warmth, a lot of connection, a lot of good structure, and a lot of risk taking, and then the whole theme was connected with the community, with the world around it. Whether they're bringing in the business end, Bo, a lawyer coming in, and the wider world, which was, I have to say, that was a huge decision I made early on, having to do with Jacques Lecoq's school. Because I went to visit Lecoq's school when Lecoq was still alive in Paris, and they famously do not allow their performers their students, to perform while they're students. And I understand the theory. Why go out and practice the bad habits that we're trying to cure here? But when I went to visit, and Avner Eisenberg's one of Lecoq's favorite students, and Avner had sent me a note, and I said hello from Avner, and it was all warm and and they wouldn't let me watch a class. It was cloistered. And I thought, first of all, it made me feel pretty bad. But also, like, what are they protecting? Their intellectual property, or are they protecting the students from me, the cancer? I just didn't. So I said, no, that's not right. Clowns are engaged. So we wanted to bring in ideas that were absolutely contrary to what we were trying to teach. We wanted to invite, students were performing all the time. The thing was, okay, let's not build the bad habits. So go perform, and then let's debrief a little on that performance. Maybe have a performance where it's part of the school, but don't cloister. As a matter of fact, bring the community in to see shows every 5 weeks. Keep the clowns engaged in the real world, not in the imaginary world of the Clown Conservatory.
I think the tour at the end of the year was probably one of the most beneficial aspects of the school.
Completely agree with you.
Was going on tour with my other classmates to perform for students throughout the Bay Area, and that was students and adults throughout the Bay Area, and that was essential to solidifying and grounding so much of what we learned.
And the idea, I actually, would you mind if I read a little bit of this? The tour, I agree, and I knew the tour. I had planned that. Look, if y'all are going to go, I want you to go off and work in circuses, theaters maybe, but I really want you to be able to go off and get jobs in circuses the day you graduate. Well, there's a lot more that's outside of a classroom, so we better go on something like a circus tour. That was the concept there. What I found on the tour was that things happened. There were moments during the tour where some students would suddenly just ground it, and they would just finally find it. I want to read this one short section here. The character that we're talking about is an imaginary student named Anita, who is from Mexico and was raised as a ballerina, and then broke out of that and came to school. And they're on tour in the third week of the tour, the seventh show. Our seventh show of the tour was in a big old theater in a center for severely disabled adults. The vans full of our audience members were already there when we arrived. We carefully steered our boxes and bags around wheelchairs and walkers. After we got all our stuff onto the raised stage and started to set up, we realized that our stage manager, Anita, wasn't there. Anita had taken the job of running the show behind the show with relish. Before each performance, she would march around backstage with her checklists on a neon pink clipboard and snap orders to us peons. When we did something wrong, she'd curse in Spanish under her breath. We complained a lot, but relied on her to keep us organized. Anita was in the hallway dancing with an old woman in a wheelchair. A disheveled-looking man in his 20s was singing Sweet Caroline at the top of his lungs with an aide holding onto a strap around the man's waist to keep him from falling on the dancers. Like Roger at the death school, our perfect dancer had found her people. As the rest of us watched from the lip of the stage, Anita shimmied and shook as the man sang and the woman waved her arms. Pretty soon, the hall was filled with people, staff members and patients, all moving and singing and howling and laughing. It looked like a Bruegel painting come to life.
Gorgeous. Our actual show at the Home for the Disabled was probably my best show in the tour.
I love it.
By far.
I love it.
I think we did something very different because someone's partner had gotten injured, so we had to stop doing our act, and they had to stop doing their act, and we had to, in a very short period of time, put together a 4-person act. So we did a spaghetti restaurant act that we'd kind of already devised.
Yes.
And using our eccentric juggling skills, which I've been working on. This wasn't the main act that we developed. My partner at that time, Patrick Myers, and I had a trunk act.
Yeah, you did.
Very absurdist trunk act.
It was really funny.
We ended up working with Kelsey Custard and Susan Santos, doing a restaurant scene. Kelsey went on to star in multiple Cirque shows.
Yep.
She was in
Ka.
And now she's in...
Yep.
I can't remember what it is, but Amaluna.
Amaluna, yes,
She's in Amaluna in Europe, I think there is, where they are right now. And I believe Susan Santos is up at Senka in Seattle.
In Seattle with some other clown conservatory grads, with the
Gentiles.
And
Audrey Spinazzola.
Exactly.
And, there's a lot of people
again,
up there.
that history that comes back. What a group, though. I mean, you, Patrick, Suzanne, and Kelsey. So that was good. I'm glad, because you're right that the idea was, for the final show, we're not improvising here. We're nailing this down. We're really rehearsing it. We're not putting in the 100 hours per minute that I recommended, but it was pretty close. It was a lot of work done. By the end of the tour, it probably was 100 hours per minute if you take stage time and schlep time. But having to suddenly adjust to a new routine with a new group.
It was a solid act. I was really happy with the way it came out, and that audience was the best audience that we performed for. I have a very special place in my heart for what they now call cognitively disabled adults. It just does a lot for me. It makes me all whoopy. Okay, we're almost out of time. So before we run out, I wanted to hit you with a couple more quick ones.
Please.
What's your favorite pieces of media, film, television, books, that influence you still to this day?
About clowning?
In any way.
Oh, wow. Laurel and Hardy influenced me because I've done a few shows where I use their bits directly, so I watch them over and over again. Right now, this is nothing much about clowning, but right now I'm doing a lot of reading and thinking about capitalism, about our economic system. When all eyes are on our political system and how wild it is, I'm looking at the economic system. Robert Reich's book.
I was going to say Robert Reich would be
which is a really interesting book. And there's a 6 DVD movie that I got pledging to KPFA, which is, by the way, where I started my career in radio, and it's a really beautifully produced history of capitalism. So that's what I'm looking at right now.
Okay, works that exist in the world that you think are underrated, something that maybe has had an impact on you that you think doesn't get the love or attention that it deserves.
I'm going to answer that a few ways. One is I've been thinking a lot about Dario Fo. And because he was our Nobel Prize winning clown, I got to spend 2 weeks watching him and his wife Franca Rame work, rehearsing The Pope and the Witch, Il Papa e la Strega. And his plays, I would love to do one of his plays. And they're not done, and they're really right for our times. They really are. We are in Dario Fo times right now. His absurdist sense and just screaming anger at the idiocy of a political class and an economic class. I also think that the clown entrees, which Dominique taught me, as he was teaching you, as he was teaching the students, I was learning. It's this canon of about 100 entrees. I know a third.
An entree is a structured, codified base skeleton of an act that clowns then build upon with their own filigree and decoration.
Well said. Exactly. Clowns could be using them. I was up at Del Arte doing a book reading at the Arcada Playhouse, David Fernie, and I was talking about structure and character, and I think Joan Shirley, who's one of the founders of Del Arte, said that she's heard Jeff Hoyle, great clown Jeff Hoyle, say, why are people inventing new structures? There are hundreds of great clown structures that you just use. Why invent something that's weaker? And I really agree with that. I feel like the creativity the clowns put in could be best spent on filling out an existing structure, like what actors do. And clown structures aren't like plays because they're thin.
So do you know anyone who's currently working heavily in Entree?
No. It surprised me. It's gold there waiting to happen. You know, Dominique used to tell the story when in Paris when he was growing up. You had Cirque Madrano and Cirque de Verre, and they would change their acts. All the acts but the clowns would change every month because they were in permanent buildings in Paris, and everyone would go see both, especially young Dominique Jandot. But the clowns every month would say the same group, like the Fratellini would change, but they would change entrees every month. So every month for the whole season, they had to have a new entree. Well, they could only do that. If they were trying to make it from scratch, you can't write a new clown play. And they were doing long. There's 20-minute, maybe 2 or 3 in a show. But if you have the structure, you know your clown characters, you know your character relationships, here it comes, and the audience will come buy another ticket.
All right, so your book, Secret Life of Clowns, what's the subtitle?
The Secret Life of Clowns, a backstage tour of Cirque du Soleil and the Clown Conservatory.
Where and when is that available?
I love that question. So it's available on the website, which is secretlifeofclowns.com. Pretty simple. You can also just Google Jeff Raz and go to my site, and you'll click right over there to the website for the book. It's available at, as of yesterday, Books Inc. in Alameda. It was really thrilling to see my book up there. But they put it in the nonfiction section, so we had a long discussion of fiction, nonfiction. It's available at Book Passage in Sausalito. It's available at the Circus Museum in Baraboo, Wisconsin. And it's available out of my bag. If you happen to see me, I've got them.
Right.
It's going to launch officially at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, at the Circus Arts Exhibition. It'll launch nationally on the 29th of June. And after that, I will probably make it available on other things. I was sort of enjoying this. You can only get it in the secret alley for a time.
So is it available for purchase now or just
Absolutely
pre-order?
available.
Okay.
No, no pre-order. We don't do pre-order.
Pre-order.
It's
All
for
right.
purchase.
The Medical Clown Project, if someone wants to get connected with that or connect maybe their facility with that, how would they go about that?
medicalclownproject.org or Google Medical Clown Project. You can also get there from my personal site, jeffraz.com.
And that's Raz with 1 Z.
1 Z, yes. R-A-Z, thank you. Calvin Kaiku, a colleague of yours who was a student of the Clown Conservatory, is now the director of the Medical Clown Project. We got a new board together and some exciting times at the Medical Clown Project.
Is there anything else that you would like to put forth to our great bevy of listeners?
I love having a bevy of listeners. No, just thank you. It's great to do this. It really reinforces this idea I've been having that history is right now if you tap into it. So when you send me an email and said, come do this, I thought, this is a moment where you and I can come back together again. And I'll just end with this, that the last time I sat right here in your place, you were rehearsing with Joan Mencken. And the book is dedicated to Joan Mencken and Paoli Lacey, and there's actually 5 folks who died coming out of my time at the Clown Conservatory. And you were rehearsing with Joan when she was starting to get dementia, and you had stepped up and said, she needs to perform, which was really true. But she needs people who will be patient with her performing. We have this gig, and you were working on this routine with her, and you asked me to come over. And it was so hard. I remember how hard it was for you, but I remember this moment when I was giving some notes, which is really interesting when you're giving notes to a former teacher who now has dementia, Joan, and a former student who's really trying to do the right thing. And Joan was just looking at me and smiling, and then she put her head on your shoulder. And I just about cried because we were talking theater. We were rehearsing, but what was really happening? Human beings taking care of each other.
In that performance, which was at Civic Center Plaza, which is a very, very nasty, underserved, grimy, gritty part of downtown San Francisco, and we were doing a children's circus festival. For some reason there, I was in charge of the programming for a festival there, and I'm like, well, let's do some clown there. During that show, I believe Duo Finelli, Luz Gahiola and Molly Molly Shannon and Luz Gahiola were up there performing, and they said something that triggered Joan, and she walked up and flashed them, which was kind of a epitomal Joan, in her golden era moment, and it really resonates with me. Well, Jeff, thank you very, very much for coming and joining us. Just selfishly, one more thing: if you could tag 3 other people who should do this podcast, who should I reach out to?
You definitely should reach out to Calvin,
Okay.
Kaiku. You might want to reach out, going beyond the area, to someone like Avner, who's been doing this for 50 years. Diane Wozniak.
That's 3.
My old partner.
All right. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening, ladies and gentlemen. If you'd like to hear more, you can find more of our programs at www.picklewater.com. To support us on Patreon, please go to www.dungeonsandpeppers.com. Theme song by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech Music.